It all started on a calm Sunday morning. I had just stepped out into my backyard with a steaming cup of coffee, ready to enjoy the first rays of sunlight and the quiet hum of my neighborhood. The grass was freshly trimmed, flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and everything looked peaceful. Little did I know, this ordinary morning would mark the beginning of one of the most stressful and shocking experiences of my life. The knock on the door came, just as I was taking my first sip of coffee. I opened it to find two men wearing crisp shirts with the HOA logo pinned neatly on their chest. Their expressions were serious, their eyes sharp, and their body language carried authority. They wasted no time on pleasantries. "We need to talk about your backyard," one of them said. "According to our records, this land isn't yours." "It belongs to the HOA." I froze. My backyard? The space where I had planted flowers, trimmed hedges, and spent countless hours enjoying the sun. The place my children had played, the place I had worked to turn into my personal haven. Suddenly, it was no longer mine, or at least that's what they claimed. I tried to process their words, but confusion and disbelief swirled inside me. I don't understand," I stammered. "This backyard has been part of my property for years." They spoke in precise, legalistic terms about surveys, plot lines, and HOA boundaries. Their words sounded official and intimidating, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. How could the HOA suddenly claim ownership of land I had been using for over a decade? Then mentioned fines, enforcement policies, and potential legal action. The tone was calm, but the underlying threat was clear. It felt like my sanctuary, my private space, was suddenly under siege. In the following days, I combed through every document I could find: property deeds, official surveys, city maps, and past correspondence with the HOA. Every record I examined confirmed the same thing: my backyard was legally mine. Yet the HOA representatives insisted otherwise, and their visits became more frequent. They staked the property, measured corners, and spoke in hushed tones that seemed to carry authority in the neighborhood. I began to notice neighbors watching, some curious, some concerned. It was clear this dispute was growing beyond just a simple misunderstanding. Feeling the pressure, I decided it was time to hire an independent surveyor, someone who could measure the property professionally and without bias. When the surveyor arrived, I watched closely as he took precise measurements, placed stakes at the corners, and consulted detailed maps. Each step was methodical and careful, designed to leave no room for error. I felt a mix of hope and anxiety. What if the HOA was right? What if all my assumptions were wrong? My heart raced as the surveyor explained the process, noting that the final report would definitively settle the dispute. While waiting for the results, my stress levels skyrocketed. The backyard I had cherished for so long had become a source of anxiety. I replayed past interactions with the HOA, remembering how their tone had subtly shifted from casual oversight to something more threatening. It was a mix of intimidation and condescension, a reminder that sometimes authority can be wielded unfairly. I realized that this wasn't just about land, it was about control, about power, and about who could assert it most convincingly. Finally, the survey results arrived. I sat down with trembling hands and carefully examined every detail. Every measurement, every plotted line, every annotation confirmed what I already knew in my heart. My backyard was mine entirely and legally. Not an inch belonged to the HOA. The relief was instant, but it was tempered by another thought. How would they react to this undeniable proof? They had been so confident, so assertive, so certain that their claim was unassailable. Now, the tables had turned when I delivered the survey results to the HOA. The response was immediate and predictable. Surprise, disbelief, and a slight edge of frustration colored their tone. They asked to review the documents, questioned minor details, and suggested that perhaps there had been an oversight. I remained calm, professional, and unwavering. The survey didn't lie. The evidence was clear, and I was prepared to stand. My ground. As word of the survey spread, neighbors started talking. Some expressed shock that the HOA would even attempt such a claim, while others were relieved that the truth had been revealed. What began as a private property dispute had grown into a neighborhood spectacle. People began to question how common such aggressive tactics might be and whether other homeowners had faced similar challenges. The tension in the community was palpable, but there was also a sense of vindication and justice. The story of my backyard was no longer just about property lines. It had become a narrative about standing up to authority, verifying facts, and trusting in documented truth. While the initial confrontation with the HOA had been stressful, the survey results provided clarity, confidence, and a clear path forward. Yet, even with the proof in hand, I knew the journey was far from over. The HOA might accept the findings grudgingly, or they might attempt further legal maneuvering to maintain control. And so, as the sun set over my backyard that evening, I felt a mix of relief and anticipation. Relief that the evidence confirmed what I knew all along, and anticipation for what the next steps would bring. One thing was clear: the survey results had shocked everyone, and my backyard was officially recognized as mine. But the larger story, the reactions, the negotiations, and the community dynamics was only beginning. This backyard, once a quiet, peaceful retreat, had become the center of tension, drama, and unexpected lessons about persistence, courage, and the importance of standing up for your rights. It was a reminder that sometimes, even in familiar surroundings, life can deliver the most unexpected challenges, and the way you respond can make all the difference. After the survey report was submitted, I could sense the shift immediately. The HOA representatives arrived at my door, this time with an unusual air of caution. Gone were the confident, almost threatening tones of before. Now they spoke in careful, measured sentences, as if testing the waters to see how far I would push. "We've reviewed your documents," one of them began, "and there seems to be a discrepancy. Perhaps we should discuss a compromise." I listened, but I wasn't about to compromise something that was legally mine. My backyard had been in my family for years, maintained, nurtured, and enjoyed without dispute. The thought that I would allow a so-called compromise over something that belonged to me was unfathomable. Still, I remained calm, letting them speak while internally preparing for the next steps. This wasn't just about property lines. It was about standing firm against intimidation, about protecting the rights of homeowners, and about ensuring that truth prevailed over arbitrary claims. Word of the survey and the HOA's unusual behavior spread quickly throughout the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once been indifferent were now curious, some whispering as they walked by, others stopping to ask questions directly. "Did you really win against the HOA?" One neighbor asked, eyes wide with disbelief. "I never thought." "It was possible," said another, shaking their head. Suddenly, my backyard dispute had become more than just a personal matter. It had become a story, a cautionary tale, and an example of what could happen when authority is questioned. The however, was not done. Their next approach was subtler, less direct, but no less unsettling. Notices began appearing in mailboxes about property maintenance, boundary regulations, and compliance checks. They seemed designed to intimidate, to create a sense of uncertainty. Every notice was signed, stamped, and carefully worded to imply oversight, even though the survey had already clarified the true boundaries. It was a psychological game, and they were testing to see how I, and perhaps other homeowners, would react. I realized that documentation alone would not be enough to end this ordeal. I had to anticipate every move, understand their tactics, and remain vigilant. The survey had won me the first battle, but the war for peace and certainty in my backyard was still unfolding. I began keeping a detailed log of all interactions, taking photos of the boundaries, and maintaining records of every letter, email, and conversation with the HOA. Preparation became my shield against further intimidation. As days turned into weeks, the tension grew. The HOA scheduled a neighborhood meeting, ostensibly to discuss general matters, but it quickly became clear that my backyard dispute was the central topic. The room was filled with homeowners, many curious, others anxious, and a few plainly skeptical. The HOA representatives presented their side first, speaking about regulations, maps, and what they termed administrative errors. Their presentation was polished, professional, and designed to persuade. But when it came time for me to present the survey results, a collective silence filled the room. I explained, calmly and clearly, each measurement, each boundary, each legal document that proved my claim. The room leaned in as I showed maps, photographs, and the official survey report. Eyes widened as the undeniable truth became apparent. The HOA had no claim over my backyard. The tension in the room shifted from uncertainty to shock. Some homeowners whispered among themselves, impressed by the clarity and precision of the evidence. Others seemed frustrated or embarrassed on behalf of the HOA, realizing that their representatives had been so confident yet so wrong. In the days following the meeting, the neighborhood dynamic changed dramatically. People who had once ignored the HOA's heavy-handed tactics began speaking up, asking questions and verifying their own property records. My backyard dispute had inadvertently sparked awareness throughout the community. Homeowners realized that standing up, questioning authority, and insisting on documented proof were not just necessary, they were essential for protecting their property rights. Meanwhile, the HOA attempted to regroup. Emails were sent, subtle threats implied, and casual mentions of fines or enforcement strategies were circulated. But now I was prepared. The survey, my documentation, and the public acknowledgement of my ownership provided a solid foundation. That could not be disputed. Every move they made was met with evidence, calm responses, and unwavering certainty. I had shifted the balance of power. This experience also taught me about human nature, about the way people respond to authority, and the length some organizations will go to assert control. The HOA's initial aggression, their overconfidence, and their eventual shock revealed a pattern. When backed into a corner with undeniable truth, even the most authoritative figures must retreat. It became a lesson not just for me, but for every neighbor who witnessed the unfolding events. The suspense, however, was far from over. The OA could accept the survey quietly, attempt a legal appeal, or even push for obscure technicalities to regain control. Every day brought new emails, subtle inquiries, or indirect inquiries about the property. My vigilance became crucial, but with the survey as my shield, I faced each challenge confidently. The journey had transformed my backyard from a private sanctuary into a battleground of truth, courage, and persistence. And yet, amidst the tension, there was a sense of satisfaction. For the first time, the power of evidence, preparation, and calm determination had been fully realized. My backyard was no longer just a patch of grass and flowers. It had become a symbol of standing up for one's rights, of demanding clarity in the face of intimidation, and of proving that honesty and persistence could triumph over bureaucracy and overreach. By the end of this second part, one thing was undeniable. The OSA had been shaken to its core. The survey had not only protected my backyard, it had also shifted the neighborhood dynamic, empowered other homeowners, and exposed the limits of the HOA's authority. But even with this victory, the final chapter was yet to come. The reactions, potential legal ramifications, and ultimate resolution of this conflict promised to shock everyone who had been watching. The days following the neighborhood meeting felt surreal. On one hand, I had undeniable proof official survey results, photographs, and public acknowledgement that my backyard was legally mine. On the other hand, the HOA still lingered like a shadow, their subtle threats and indirect inquiries creating an almost constant tension. Every interaction, every email, every casual conversation was a reminder that they weren't ready to let go quietly. It was clear that the final chapter of this conflict was approaching, and I needed to be prepared for whatever came next. It started with small signs. Letters slipped under the door, titled with legal jargon and warnings, suggesting that there might be clerical errors or possible misinterpretations of the survey. Each letter was carefully worded, implying that they still held some authority, that the dispute was not fully resolved. But for the first time, I felt a sense of empowerment. I had the survey, I had documentation, and I had the support of neighbors who had witnessed the unfolding events. I wasn't intimidated anymore. The HOA may have had authority on paper, But the truth was on my side. The tension escalated when a formal meeting was scheduled at the HOA office. The representatives insisted that I attend in person to discuss the next steps regarding property boundaries. I knew this was their attempt to intimidate me further, to make me doubt the clarity of the survey. Still, I agreed, fully prepared. Armed with multiple copies of the survey, my notes, and photographic evidence, I also invited a legal advisor to accompany me, ensuring that any attempt at manipulation could be countered immediately. As I entered the office, I could feel the atmosphere shift. The confident, almost arrogant tone of the HOA members had disappeared. Their eyes flickered with unease as I laid out the survey results on the table. Every measurement, every plotted boundary, every legal notation was clearly visible. There was no ambiguity. The survey not only proved that the backyard was mine, but it also exposed the HOA's repeated attempts to claim authority they did not possess. They tried to challenge minor details, suggesting that certain corners could be interpreted differently or that historical records might show conflicting information. I remained calm, responding with documented evidence, timelines, and previous interactions. My advisor backed every point with legal precedents, reinforcing the undeniable validity of the survey. Slowly, the room's energy shifted. Confidence turned into frustration, frustration turned into unease, and finally, a reluctant acknowledgement. There was no longer a plausible way for them to dispute the results. News of the confrontation spread quickly through the neighborhood. Many neighbors who had witnessed the early stages of the dispute reached out, offering support, sharing their own experiences, or simply expressing relief that justice seemed imminent. It was fascinating to see how a single backyard dispute had evolved into a lesson for an entire community about standing up to authority, verifying facts, and insisting on truth over intimidation. The HOA's tactics, once effective, now seemed transparent, almost foolish, in the eyes of everyone who had been following the story, but the real shock came a few days later. The HOA officially released a statement acknowledging the survey results. They admitted that the backyard belonged to me, that their initial claim was mistaken, and that any previous communications suggesting otherwise were issued in error. The tone of the statement was cautious, even apologetic, a stark contrast to the aggression and certainty they had displayed just weeks before. For many, this official acknowledgement was the climax of the story. The moment when truth and preparation overcame intimidation and overreach. Even after the formal acknowledgement, the impact of the survey and the dispute resonated throughout the neighborhood. Homeowners became more vigilant about property records, more confident in challenging questionable claims, and more aware of the importance of documentation and legal verification. My backyard, once just a personal retreat, had become a symbol of empowerment and diligence. It demonstrated how knowledge, evidence, and persistence could turn a potentially stressful conflict into a story of triumph. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, I realized that the conflict had taught me far more than I ever expected. I had learned the importance of standing firm, the value of preparation, and the power of facts over assumptions. I had witnessed the dynamics of authority, community, and neighborhood politics firsthand, and I had discovered that courage and patience often outweigh intimidation. My backyard, now officially recognized as mine, was not just a piece of land, it was a testament to perseverance, truth, and justice. As I returned to my morning routine in the days that followed, the backyard felt different. The flowers, the grass, the garden that I had painstakingly maintained, all of it now carried an added significance. It was no longer just a private space, it was a victory, a symbol of resilience. The neighborhood had changed too. Conversations shifted from idle gossip to discussions about property rights, fairness, and standing up against overreach. The story of my backyard became a cautionary tale, inspiring others to protect what was rightfully theirs. And though the HOA had officially recognized the survey, the story remained a reminder. Even in seemingly ordinary circumstances, authority can be challenged and truth can prevail. Every knock on the door, every notice, every tense conversation had led to this moment, when evidence, preparation, and courage overcame intimidation and uncertainty. My backyard, once under threat, was now a symbol of triumph, and the survey. Results that had shocked everyone became the anchor for a community lesson that would not be forgotten. In the end, the ordeal taught me patience, resilience, and the power of standing up for what is right. The HOA's initial claim, the repeated visits, the subtle threats, and the attempts at control had all been countered by one undeniable fact. The survey proved the truth. The backyard was mine, and the neighborhood would remember the story of how careful documentation, calm determination, and unwavering persistence had turned what could have been a stressful nightmare into a clear, victorious ending. The backyard was finally mine again, not just as a piece of land, but as a testament to justice, truth, and the importance of never backing down when you know you are right. And as I walked through the grass one last time that evening, sunlight casting long shadows over the fence, I knew that this story would be remembered by neighbors, HOA representatives, and anyone who believed that standing up for your rights is always worth it.